this second part, I want to say something about the Christian snowball, if the expression is allowed. I call this a glorious ruin, the biblical understanding of life. So for 2,000 years, at least in some parts of Europe, it is the biblical understanding of reality that has been there. And for other parts, it's more for 1,000 years, like up here in the north. The Christian faith has been here for more than 1,000 years. And this has been the foundation of the Western civilization. Gradually, ideas from the Bible came to impact and inform more and more areas of life. It was a gradually, sometimes a too slow process, but still a gradual process of ideas and their good consequences being implemented. Of course, not in a perfect way, far from it. There has never been, after the fall, a golden era, and there are so much you can criticize and so many horrific things happening in Europe when nearly everyone claimed to be a Christian. So we need to have a perspective here. But still, there was a basic understanding that meant that you could actually criticize also the bad things that happened. The Christian faith starts, of course, with this idea. In the beginning, God, he creates heaven and earth and everything in it. He is there from all eternity. He is the eternal God, and in him, the true, the good, and the beautiful is anchored. He is the foundation for these three transcendentals that philosopher talks about: the true, the good, and the beautiful. Those aspects that we as human beings are longing for, are searching for. According to the Christian faith, there is this personal triune God who is the source of everything true, everything good, everything beautiful, everything that is of importance for us as human beings has its foundation within him. Truth, love, goodness, beauty, freedom, unity and diversity, meaning and hope. This is such a revolutionary idea if you compare it to all other religions and worldviews, who gives other starting points of either nothing or the impersonal or many small chaotic gods. There's nothing that can compare with this starting point of one personal God, the foundation of everything that we need and long for. He has created this world, and he has created us as human beings. And we are here because he has designed us, and he has said that we are created in his image. The first book of the Bible, Genesis, starts, of course, with the famous word, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and then continues to say that God said, let there be light. And there was light, and then God continues to create. And then on day 6 in the creation account, we are created as human beings. And I like the way that a Bulgarian professor of philosophy have formulated it. He's saying, like God in the beginning said, let there be light, he also said, let there be you. That is the basic view of human beings within the Christian faiths, the basic ontology of personhood, that there is a personal God who has created us in his image, and he has said to each and every one of us, let there be you. And he has called us to live for him, to serve him, to love him, to know him. And this is the most elevated view of the human person you can imagine. God saying, let there be you. and that's why I exist. That's why I've had a life. This idea of the human being being created in the image of God have had enormous implications for our culture. Again, Nietzsche, who is such a clear thinker, he wrote this. Another Christian concept, no less crazy. You know, he does not like Christianity. He thinks Christianity is bad and crazy. Another Christian concept, no less crazy, has passed even more deeply into the tissue of modernity, and that is the concept of the equality of souls before God. This concept furnishes the prototype of all theories of equal rights. So it's very clear here. This idea is that every individual human beings is equal, and they have rights, and they have value and dignity. Where does that come from? It's not typical for human cultures all through history. It comes from the Bible. It is this Christian concept of, he calls it the equality of souls before God. And that is, of course, based on this idea, everyone being created in the image of God. Therefore, everyone is equal in status before God, regardless of all our diversities and differences between us. We are equal in dignity and in rights before God. So he sees that this unique aspect of the Western culture, the high view of the human being, comes from Christianity. A more contemporary atheist, the German sociologist and philosopher Jürgen Habermas, so he's not a Christian, he said, egalitarian universalism, egalitarian again, that we are equal basically as human beings, egalitarian universalism, human rights and democracy is the direct heir of the Judaic ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love. To this day, there is no alternative to it. So here was a snowball started to roll in our culture, the idea that we are created in the image of God. Now, it took a long time before the consequences were actually applied. But there was a gradual elevating of the view of children, of slaves, of women, until we have this full realization, well, everyone is created in the image of God. And of course, that's kind of ideas which is behind the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And Habermas says there is no alternative to it. If you put other ideas, like there is no God, we're just evolved animals, you will not have this idea of equal rights. So here's a snowball that have been rolling in our culture, relating to us as human beings. Let me take another aspect, that is science. It is, as it is with the view of the human being, something that is unique for the Western culture. Science arose in the Western world, science as a systematic investigation, in reality as such, trying to explore the universe, not only to discover separate things, but collectively to work to try to understand this world. Rodney Stark, who has written quite a lot about this, he says in his book, For the Glory of God, not only were science and religion compatible, they were inseparable. Christian theology was essential for the rise of science. What was it in the Christian theology that made it essential for the rise of science? Well, I like to illustrate it like this. You see this just hurdle of threads. It's just a chaos of different small threads, and no one is tempted to try to understand how on earth did this happen, and how can we sort it out and find out each individual thread. The difference, if you see this, is an absolute difference. This is a crossword. And if you're like my wife, you're immediately tempted to try to solve it. Why? Because you know there is a mind behind it. There is someone who has constructed it. And if you are knowledgeable enough and intelligent enough, you can actually solve it. There is a solution. There is a right word that should be put into every spot. Compare that to the other side, where everything is just chaos. Now, most of the other religions and philosophies, they have this chaotic perspective of the world. You can think of the polytheistic world of the Greco-Roman world with all their different gods. Most cultures in the history of humanity has been polytheistic, and they have had this chaos, which does not give an impetus to really understand. It was from the Christian faith that this idea of intelligibility came. This is a creation that comes from God. And we have been created by God with a mind. So it's a similar, when I see the crossword, I know, wow, this is a human being, someone with a mind who has constructed this. Therefore, there is a solution that I might be able to find. Of course, we do not have the mind of God. God is an infinite mind, but we have a small reflection. We are created in his image, and we can think his thoughts after him. And that was what Christians in Europe started to do. They thought, this is a world created by God, and we can try to understand it. And gradually, what we call science developed. This is Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher and mathematician and genius, you can say. He says something really interesting about man. I mentioned the Christian view of man as, or human beings as created in the image of God. But there is another aspect. We are not only a reflection of a good God, we are also a really tragic being. And Blaise Pascal, he is often quoted with these words. He describes us with saying, the greatness and the wretchedness of man are so evident that the true religion must necessarily teach us both that there is in man some great source of greatness and the great source of wretchedness. It must then give us a reason for these astonishing contradictions. Every philosophy and religion needs to address those two aspects of reality, of the human reality, that we are great. We have some fantastic, wonderful, amazing abilities. And then we are corrupt. We are wretched. There is a tragedy and there is evil. How can the human being be those two things simultaneously? It needs an explanation. He says, and I continue, this is still Pascal, the greatness of man is great in that he knows himself to be miserable. A tree does not know itself to be miserable. It is then being miserable to know oneself to be miserable, but it is also being great to know that one is miserable. All these same miseries prove man's greatness. They are the miseries of a great lord, of a deposed king, a deposed royalty. Now, this is a wonderful description of the human being, and it comes from the Christian faith, who talks about us being created in the image of God, but being fallen in sin. That we are great, but we are wretched. That we are a king, but we are deposed. We are a fallen. This fits with reality. And this understanding of the human being has helped to create a culture that can affirm human beings, at the same time being realistic about the evil of human beings and put limits to that. One of my heroes is Francis Schaeffer, and he used the phrase a glorious ruin to talk about us as human beings, to capture these ideas that we are created in the image of God, but we are fallen and corrupt, deeply affected by sin and darkness. So the Christian perspective is that this is a creation and we are a creation from God, but there has been a fall. So we are now like a ruin. If you imagine you stand before a great castle, but now it is a ruin. You can imagine how beautiful it was before it became a ruin, But now it's all a ruin. It's empty. It's destroyed. It does not have its original beauty. But the fantastic thing with the Christian faith is that it says God has not abandoned his creation, but he has decided to redeem it and to restore it. Like a ruin can be restored and restored and be even more beauty than it originally was. So the Christian faith has given the Western world both a understanding of the greatness and the wretchedness of man, but also given us meaning and hope. This is not the final situation. Even though we are wretched, even though we are corrupted, there is meaning for us as human beings, and there is hope, because God has promised to restore his world. And the wonderful offer of the gospel is, of course, that we through Jesus Christ receive forgiveness. We are becoming born again, new creations in Christ, and we are giving the Holy Spirit as a gift, and we await the full restoration of the bodily resurrection and the glorification, not only of ourselves, both on the inside and for our body, but the glorification of the whole universe, new heavens and a new earth with righteousness. This gives meaning to life, and this gives hope to life, even in the light of the wretchedness and the corruption and evil. I do really like these words that's is found in one of the books by J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings. He talks about the Christian story, that it begins and ends with joy. That is so beautiful. It begins with joy, eternal joy within God himself, joy in creation, where everything is good and God walks amongst humans in the garden. And then you have the fall and the darkness and the evil. But it does not end there, but it ends with the full restoration. It ends with the joy on the new earth, where God again lives amongst his people. And everything dark and everything evil is thrown into the lake of fire, into the second death, and it kind of disappears away. And everything is made right again. This is such a wonderful picture if you think of a beginning of joy and an end of joy. In the next session, we're going to look what has happened in our culture when the other snowball have started to roll, a snowball without joy from the beginning and without joy at the end. And yet it has become the dominant snowball in our culture today. It has replaced this first snowball, this wonderful perspective of a beginning of joy and an end with joy, with an affirmation of human being, because it is an affirmation of the living God.